On a frozen December morning in 1944, just outside the Belgian village of Uweiler, an American military policeman watched a jeep approach his checkpoint with practiced suspicion. Sergeant William Creel lifted his hand to halt the vehicle, his breath forming clouds in the bitter cold. Inside sat three men wearing what appeared to be standard United States Army uniforms, carrying weapons that looked regulation issue, and speaking English with only the slightest trace of something not quite authentic. Creel had received warnings about an impossible situation unfolding across the front lines. Intelligence briefings spoke of German troops infiltrating American positions while disguised in stolen uniforms, an audacious violation of every military convention he understood. When Creel demanded the password, the three occupants exchanged uncertain glances. He repeated his demand more forcefully. Their English began to deteriorate under pressure, words coming slower and with less confidence. Then the sergeant's trained eye caught something that confirmed his suspicions. The men carried Sten guns, British submachine guns that no legitimate American patrol would possess. Within minutes, all three found themselves under arrest and in handcuffs. When their olive-drab jackets were removed, German field grey uniforms became visible underneath. Unteroffizier Manfred Pernas, Oberfähnrich Günther Billing and Gefreiter Wilhelm Schmidt had just become the first confirmed captures in what would evolve into the most widespread security panic in American military history. None of them could have predicted that their apprehension would trigger a systematic campaign of cultural interrogation, transforming every checkpoint into an impromptu examination, every conversation into a test of authentic American identity, and every soldier into a potential suspect. The methods for detecting infiltrators would rely not on traditional codes or military procedures, but on intimate knowledge of baseball statistics, state geography, and Hollywood trivia. The origins of this elaborate deception stretched back to late October 1944, when the German High Command summoned SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny to military headquarters in East Prussia. The commando officer already possessed a fearsome reputation throughout German military circles. Just over a year earlier, in September 1943, he had orchestrated the dramatic rescue of deposed Italian dictator Benito Mussolini from his mountain prison at Gran Sasso. Skorzeny's glider troops had landed on a seemingly inaccessible plateau and extracted Il Duce in a small aircraft that barely managed to become airborne from the rocky terrain. More recently, in October 1944, Skorzeny had kidnapped the son of Hungary's regent, Miklos Horthy Jr., forcing the regent's resignation and preventing Hungary from abandoning its alliance with Germany. Now the Führer presented Skorzeny with his most audacious assignment yet, one that would require deception on an unprecedented scale. The German leader explained his plan for a massive counter-offensive through the Ardennes forest, the same region where German armoured forces had achieved their stunning breakthrough in May 1940. This time, German panzers would drive toward the crucial Belgian port of Antwerp, splitting the American and British armies and potentially forcing the Western Allies to negotiate a separate peace. Success depended entirely on speed. German forces needed to capture at least one intact bridge over the Meuse River before Allied engineers could destroy them. This critical objective fell to Skorzeny and a special brigade he would form specifically for this mission, designated Panzer Brigade 150. The unit's purpose would be seizing those vital river crossings before demolition charges could drop them into the water. Then the Führer announced a decision that gave even the hardened commando pause. The bridges could be captured more efficiently and with fewer casualties if Skorzeny's men wore American and British uniforms during their approach. Small teams disguised in enemy clothing could create tremendous confusion throughout the Allied rear areas, the German leader explained, disrupting communications, misdirecting troop movements, and spreading panic that would multiply their actual numbers many times over. Skorzeny listened carefully, immediately understanding the legal implications under international law. The Hague Convention of 1907 stated explicitly that soldiers captured while wearing enemy uniforms forfeited their status as prisoners of war and could be executed as spies. This possibility prompted extensive discussion with General Oberst Alfred Jodl and Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, but the Führer assured Skorzeny the tactic remained legitimate, provided his men removed the Allied uniforms before actually engaging in combat. Within days, Skorzeny submitted detailed plans to the High Command. His requirements included 3,300 men with fluency in English and knowledge of American dialects. On October 25th, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht broadcast an order to every headquarters on the Western Front requesting English-speaking volunteers for unspecified special operations. The order, signed by Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel himself, called for soldiers with language skills and familiarity with American idioms and customs. Skorzeny recognized immediately that this broadcast request would reach Allied intelligence within days, potentially compromising the entire operation before it began. He requested permission to cancel the mission, but the Führer denied his request, insisting the offensive proceed as planned. The Allies did indeed intercept the recruitment order on November 30th, but intelligence officers dismissed it as deliberate deception, unable to believe German planners would be so brazen as to telegraph their intentions. Volunteers began arriving from all branches of German military service, most having no clear understanding of what they had volunteered for. Fritz Christ, a 21-year-old Luftwaffe private trained as an English translator, assumed he would be interrogating American prisoners far behind the front lines. Instead, he found himself confined behind barbed wire at a training facility established at Grafenwöhr in eastern Bavaria. Security measures were extreme beyond anything he had previously experienced. One volunteer was shot when a letter he attempted to mail home accidentally revealed elements of the training location. The volunteers discovered their actual mission only after arrival at the isolated camp, when Skorzeny finally explained what would be required of them. The reality of what Skorzeny had to work with would have been comical if the stakes had not been so desperately high. Of the 2,500 men eventually assembled at the training camp, only 10 spoke perfect English with natural fluency and genuine understanding of American idioms and cultural references. Another 30 to 40 spoke English well, but possessed no real comprehension of American slang or regional expressions. Between 120 and 150 spoke moderately competent English suitable for basic communication. The remainder possessed only school-level English, barely able to manage more than yes or no responses. Skorzeny later wrote that after evaluating his volunteers for several weeks, the linguistic situation was absolutely terrifying. Those with minimal English were instructed to exclaim "sorry" if approached by any Americans, then hastily open their trousers and hurry away while feigning diarrhea, the universal condition requiring immediate privacy. The equipment procurement situation proved equally catastrophic. The German High Command was requested to provide 15 Sherman tanks, 20 armoured cars, 20 self-propelled guns, 100 jeeps, 40 motorcycles, 120 trucks, and sufficient quantities of British and American uniforms to outfit the entire brigade. The actual delivery fell disastrously short of these requirements. Only 2 Sherman tanks arrived, both in questionable mechanical condition, with one breaking down almost immediately during initial trials. Instead of the requested American armour, Skorzeny received 5 Panther tanks, 6 armoured cars, and 5 Sturmgeschütz assault guns, all obviously German in design and manufacture. The Panthers received hasty modifications with sheet metal cladding, olive drab paint, and White Star insignia painted on their hulls. Skorzeny himself admitted these disguised vehicles might fool only very young American troops observing them from great distance in darkness. The uniform situation somehow managed to be worse than the vehicle shortage. Many items that arrived were British, Polish, or Russian uniforms rather than American. Some were summer weight uniforms, despite the operation being scheduled for December. Others arrived blood-stained or still bearing prisoner-of-war markings from their previous wearers. Units across Germany, apparently confused by the unusual requisition request, simply sent whatever foreign uniforms they happened to have available. The brigade received floods of Polish and Russian equipment from units that clearly had no understanding of the operation's actual purpose. Skorzeny ultimately managed to acquire enough authentic American uniforms and weapons to outfit only his best commando teams, the men who would actually infiltrate American lines. The remainder of the brigade would have to fight as conventional German troops, their disguised vehicles offering only minimal deception value. The best English speakers were formed into a specialized unit designated Einheit Stielau, named after SS Captain Ernst Stielau, who would lead them into combat. These elite teams received intensive training despite the compressed timeline before the offensive's launch. They studied the organizational structure of the American Army, learning badges of rank, military customs, and drill procedures that might be observed at checkpoints. Some volunteers were temporarily assigned to prisoner of war camps at Kustrin and Limburg, where they could practice their English conversation with captured American soldiers. They watched American motion pictures to perfect accents and absorb current slang expressions. They memorized American brand names, professional sports teams, popular songs, and Hollywood celebrities. The commandos practiced walking like Americans, smoking cigarettes like Americans, and even chewing gum like Americans, attempting to master every small detail of behavior that might betray foreign origins under observation. The infiltration missions were divided into 3 operational categories based on team size and objectives. Demolition squads consisting of 5 to 6 men would destroy bridges, ammunition storage depots, and fuel dumps deep behind American lines. Reconnaissance patrols of 3 to 4 men would scout routes on both sides of the Meuse River while passing false orders to any American units they encountered, reversing directional road signs, removing minefield warnings, and cordoning off roads with warnings of non-existent minefields. Lead commando units would work directly with attacking German armoured forces, cutting telephone lines, destroying radio stations, and issuing contradictory orders that would confuse American command structures. Every commando understood the risks they faced. If captured while wearing American uniforms, execution was virtually guaranteed under international law. An additional danger lurked in the chaos of mechanized warfare. German troops who encountered the disguised commandos might mistake them for actual Americans and shoot them before recognition was possible. For identification purposes, the commandos would employ specific recognition signals hopefully distinguishable by German forces. Their vehicles would display small yellow triangles in designated positions. Tanks would maintain their main guns at specific angles indicating friendly forces. Individual soldiers would wear coloured scarves beneath their uniforms that could be quickly displayed if challenged by German troops. On December 14th, Panzer Brigade 150 completed its assembly near Bad Münstereifel and prepared for combat operations. On the afternoon of December 16th, they moved forward behind 3 attacking panzer divisions, beginning their drive through the Ardennes. The operational plan called for Skorzeny's disguised forces to maneuver around the advancing spearhead divisions once they reached the High Fens region, then race ahead independently to capture the Meuse bridges before American defenders could destroy them. The entire operation depended absolutely on rapid advance by the 1st SS Panzer Division, commanded by Joachim Peiper. If Peiper's armoured spearhead achieved the breakthrough German planners expected, Skorzeny's disguised troops could slip through in the resulting confusion and reach the bridge objectives before American engineers detonated their demolition charges. December 16, 1944, began several hours before dawn throughout the dark forests of the Ardennes region. Through the frozen landscape, more than 200,000 German troops launched the Führer's final great offensive in the west. The initial assault achieved complete tactical surprise. American forces, thinly distributed across an 80-mile front with minimal reserves, faced overwhelming numerical superiority. 4 inexperienced or severely depleted American divisions confronted 30 German divisions supported by nearly 1,000 tanks and assault guns. The German artillery barrage shattered the frozen pre-dawn silence with unprecedented intensity. Searchlights bounced their beams off low clouds to create artificial moonlight illuminating the battlefield. Infantry formations advanced rapidly through snow-covered forests, while panzer columns rumbled forward on narrow forest roads. During the first hours, everything proceeded largely according to German planning. The Einheit-Stielau commando teams successfully infiltrated through the confusion of American withdrawal. Dressed in captured American uniforms and driving captured jeeps, they slipped through the chaos of retreating units. One commando team drove directly into an American-held town, conducted a thorough reconnaissance of all defensive positions, then on their way out successfully redirected an American convoy of armor and supplies onto the wrong road leading away from the battle. Two additional teams successfully misdirected other Allied convoys, contributing to the general confusion. They cut telephone wires, removed directional road signs, and spread false rumours about German penetrations much deeper than actual positions. The psychological impact began immediately, with fear spreading faster than actual German troops. But on December 17th, military reality began destroying the operation's prospects for success. The 1st SS Panzer Division failed to reach its scheduled objectives on time. Unexpectedly fierce American resistance at Elsenborn Ridge denied the Germans access to the northern road network they desperately needed for rapid advance. At the town of St. Vith, American defenders fought with remarkable tenacity, delaying the German timetable by nearly an entire week. The rapid breakthrough that Operation Greif absolutely required never materialized. Skorzeny realized that same day his mission's original objectives had become impossible to achieve. He attended a staff conference at 6th Panzer Army headquarters and suggested his brigade be employed as a conventional combat unit instead. His request was approved, and Panzer Brigade 150 received orders to assemble south of Malmedy and report to the 1st SS Panzer Division for conventional operations. However, the commando teams were already operating behind American lines and could not be easily recalled. Some teams successfully completed portions of their assigned missions. Others were captured when they failed password challenges at improvised checkpoints, when nervous American soldiers noticed British weapons or German boots, when their English failed under interrogation pressure, or when they simply could not answer basic questions about American culture and daily life. The capture near Eiweiler on December 17th of Pernas, Billing and Schmidt created the panic that would define the operation's actual impact far beyond any tactical achievements. During subsequent interrogation, Schmidt made a statement that electrified Allied intelligence offices throughout the theatre. He claimed their commando mission was merely part of a much larger operation to infiltrate Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force and capture or assassinate General Dwight Eisenhower himself. Whether Schmidt actually believed this rumour or was deliberately spreading disinformation remains unclear even today. No documentary evidence has ever confirmed such an assassination plan actually existed. The genuine mission objective was capturing bridges over the Meuse River to facilitate the armoured advance. But Schmidt's statement produced immediate consequences throughout the Allied command structure. Within hours, security measures around Eisenhower increased dramatically. The Supreme Commander found himself virtually imprisoned within his headquarters at Versailles, surrounded by multiple rings of guards who meticulously checked the credentials of everyone attempting to enter the building. Eisenhower reportedly became furious at his confinement, especially when security restrictions extended through Christmas. After several days of virtual house arrest, he angrily declared he absolutely had to get out of the headquarters and didn't care if someone tried to assassinate him in the attempt. The paranoia spread far beyond measures protecting Eisenhower personally. Allied forces, already reeling from the shock of the German offensive and struggling to contain multiple penetrations, now perceived potential infiltrators everywhere throughout their rear areas. Checkpoints appeared at virtually every road intersection across the Allied zone, dramatically slowing the movement of troops and supplies exactly when rapid reinforcement was most desperately needed. American military policemen began systematically interrogating every soldier attempting to pass through their positions, employing questions specifically designed to expose Germans attempting to pose as Americans. What is the capital of Illinois? Who won the World Series in 1940? Who is Mickey Mouse's girlfriend? What team plays at Wrigley Field? Who is married to Betty Grable? Where does the guard stand in a football formation? Who is Frank Sinatra married to? What is the name of the president's dog? The questions ranged wildly across American geography, baseball statistics, Hollywood gossip, and popular culture references. Military policemen improvised constantly, creating new questions based on whatever fragments of American trivia they could recall from memory. The resulting system was utterly chaotic and frequently absurd in application. Many genuine American soldiers found themselves unable to answer the questions posed to them. Regional differences meant soldiers from one part of America possessed no knowledge whatsoever about details from other regions. Educational disparities meant some Americans had never learned state capitals or followed professional baseball. Cultural differences meant some soldiers had no interest in Hollywood celebrities or popular music. The checkpoint interrogations created numerous operational problems and individual injustices. General Omar Bradley was detained for considerable time when he correctly identified Springfield as the capital of Illinois. But the military policeman conducting the interrogation believed firmly that Chicago was the capital and held Bradley until his identity could be verified through other channels. Brigadier General Bruce Clark was held at gunpoint after incorrectly stating that the Chicago Cubs played in the American League rather than the National League. A captain spent an entire week in detention after being discovered wearing German boots he had acquired as battlefield souvenirs. British soldiers faced particular difficulties navigating this improvised American cultural examination system. When British reconnaissance officer David Niven encountered a checkpoint guard demanding to know who won the 1940 World Series, he could only reply honestly that he hadn't the faintest idea. British troops unable to answer questions about American sports, geography, or popular culture were routinely detained until their identities could be verified through alternative means, significantly delaying their units' movements. Some American soldiers deliberately gave wrong answers to protest what they considered absurd interrogations, resulting in their own detention until the confusion could be resolved. Others became genuinely angry at being questioned by junior enlisted personnel, creating confrontations that further slowed military operations. The widespread paranoia affected military operations at every level with significant consequences. Troop movements that should have required mere hours instead consumed entire days, as every vehicle was stopped and every occupant subjected to detailed questioning. Supply convoys sat idle at checkpoints while drivers attempted to prove their authentic American identity through cultural trivia. Combat units rushing forward to reinforce threatened sectors were delayed by repeated interrogations at multiple checkpoints. Field commanders found their orders questioned by subordinates who suspected literally everyone might be a German infiltrator in disguise. The psychological impact on German infiltrators still operating behind American lines proved devastating to their operational effectiveness. Those teams still attempting to complete missions found themselves unable to move freely through rear areas, now saturated with improvised checkpoints. The cultural questions systematically exposed the inadequacies in their preparation. German intelligence had meticulously studied military procedures, learned rank insignia, and memorized American Army organizational structures, but they had completely failed to anticipate interrogations focused on baseball statistics, Hollywood marriages, and regional slang expressions. Some infiltrators attempted to avoid checkpoints entirely by traveling cross-country or through forested areas. This alternative approach made them dramatically more conspicuous to American patrols, who immediately questioned why anyone would avoid established roads. Others attempted to bluff through checkpoint interrogations, offering various excuses for why they could not answer specific questions. Very few succeeded in these attempts. Between December 16th and December 31st, American forces captured 23 confirmed members of Operation Greif. 16 were captured during December 1944, while team leader Günther Schultz was captured later and eventually tried in May 1945. Each captured infiltrator faced formal military trial under American military justice procedures. The legal situation was unambiguous under international law. Article 23 of the Hague Convention concerning laws and customs of land warfare specifically prohibited improper use of enemy military insignia and uniforms. Soldiers captured wearing enemy uniforms while conducting military operations behind enemy lines could be prosecuted as spies rather than afforded protection as prisoners of war. The first trial convened at Henri-Chapelle on December 21st. Pernas, Billing and Schmidt faced formal charges of violating the laws of war by wearing American uniforms while conducting military operations against American forces. The evidence presented was absolutely overwhelming and uncontestable. All three had been captured wearing American uniforms over German field grey, carrying American weapons and identification documents, while operating behind American lines on military missions. The trial proceeded with remarkable speed, given wartime conditions. All three defendants were convicted on all charges and sentenced to death by firing squad. On December 23, 1944, merely 2 days before Christmas, the sentences were carried out with military precision. American military police escorted the three condemned Germans to the designated execution site. Captain J. Issa of the 633rd Medical Clearing Station personally pinned white paper targets over each man's heart. Schmidt's eyeglasses were removed before execution. All three prisoners were blindfolded according to military custom. Military police personnel formed the firing squad. Billing shouted, "Long live our Führer Adolf Hitler," at the precise moment of execution. The rifles fired simultaneously. All three men died instantly from multiple gunshot wounds. Their bodies were cut down from the posts, carried away, and buried. Eventually they would be interred at the German military cemetery at Lommel, Belgium, where they rest today alongside more than 39,000 other German war dead. 13 additional Operation Greif participants were tried and executed at either Henri-Chapelle or Huy between December 21st and December 31st. Wilhelm Weisenfeld, Manfred Bonney, Hans Reich, Arno Krause, Günther Schiltz, Erhard Miegel, Horst Görlich, Norbert Pollack, Rolf Benjamin Meyer, Hans Wiczak, Otto Struller, Alfred Franz, and Antoni Murzuk all faced firing squads. Each execution followed formal military trial. Each trial found the defendants guilty of violating the Hague Convention prohibitions against improper use of enemy uniforms. Each sentence was reviewed and approved by senior American commanders before execution. The executions were carried out with military precision, conducted without personal malice, but also without any mercy or hesitation. Team leader Günther Schultz was tried by military commission in May 1945 after Germany's surrender and executed near Braunschweig on June 14th. Why his trial was postponed until after Germany's capitulation remains unclear in historical records. Who specifically ordered his execution carried out also remains uncertain. The United States Ninth Army carried out the sentence under properly constituted military authority. In total, 17 Operation Greif participants were formally executed for wearing enemy uniforms during combat operations. The operation's actual tactical accomplishments were minimal to non-existent. No bridges were successfully captured intact. No major demolitions were successfully executed against important targets. No critical communications networks were permanently disrupted. A few directional road signs were temporarily reversed. Some telephone lines were cut but quickly repaired. Several American units received false orders, though most were rapidly identified and corrected. But the psychological impact vastly exceeded any direct tactical results. For weeks, American forces throughout the theatre operated under the fundamental assumption that German infiltrators might literally be anywhere wearing any uniform. The paranoia affected decision-making processes at every command level. Eisenhower's protective confinement meant the Supreme Commander remained isolated from direct personal observation of battlefield conditions during the absolutely critical opening phase of the German offensive. The checkpoint delays systematically slowed the American response to German penetrations precisely when rapid movement was most essential. Units that should have reached threatened sectors within hours instead required days to arrive due to repeated interrogations. The widespread suspicion degraded unit cohesion throughout American forces. Soldiers who should have remained focused exclusively on fighting Germans to their front instead worried constantly about possible Germans infiltrating among them. The Battle of the Bulge itself proceeded largely independent of Operation Greif's activities after the first several days. German forces initially achieved significant penetrations, but never accomplished the decisive breakthrough German planning required. The northern shoulder of the German advance was contained by American forces holding Elsenborn Ridge against repeated attacks. The southern shoulder was anchored by the stubborn defence of Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne Division found itself surrounded and under siege. When German commanders sent surrender demands to the encircled American forces, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe responded with a single word that became legendary: nuts. When confused German officers inquired what this word meant, they received the translation as equivalent to go to hell. The 101st Airborne successfully held Bastogne until relieved by Lieutenant General George Patton's Third Army on December 26. Patton's forces had executed a remarkable 90-degree pivot, disengaging from their positions on the Third Army front and driving north to break the siege in one of the war's most impressive operational movements. By early January, coordinated Allied counterattacks had systematically eliminated the Bulge and restored the front lines to approximately their pre-offensive positions. The battle officially lasted from December 16, 1944 through January 25, 1945. More than 1 million men participated on both sides, making it the largest single battle fought by the United States Army outside the American Civil War. American casualties exceeded 80,000 men, including 19,000 killed in action and 23,000 captured. German casualties were roughly similar in total numbers, but Germany's strategic situation meant these losses could not be adequately replaced. The battle definitively marked the end of Germany's ability to conduct major offensive operations in the Western theatre. The Führer had gambled virtually everything remaining in Germany's strategic reserve on the Ardennes offensive and lost comprehensively. For Otto Skorzeny personally, Operation Greif effectively ended on December 17th, when Panzer Brigade 150 received orders converting it to conventional combat operations. On December 21st, the brigade attempted to capture the town of Malmedy, but was decisively repulsed after conducting several costly assaults. Skorzeny was wounded by artillery shrapnel near Ligneuville during these conventional operations. He recovered from his wounds and continued serving in various capacities until Germany's final surrender in May 1945. In May 1945, Skorzeny surrendered himself to elements of the 30th Infantry Regiment. He spent 2 full years in custody, awaiting formal trial on war crimes charges. At the Dachau trials conducted in 1947, Skorzeny and 9 other officers from Panzer Brigade 150 faced formal charges of improperly using American uniforms by entering combat while disguised and treacherously firing upon American forces while so disguised. They were additionally charged with wrongfully obtaining American uniforms and other supplies from Red Cross parcels intended for prisoners of war. Skorzeny's legal defense strategy rested on establishing a crucial distinction under international law. His operational orders had explicitly required his men to remove American uniforms before engaging in any actual combat operations. The disguises were intended exclusively for infiltration and deception purposes, not for fighting while disguised as the enemy. A surprise defense witness proved absolutely decisive in the trial's outcome. Wing Commander Forrest Frederick Edward Yo Thomas, a former British Special Operations executive agent, testified that Allied Special Operations Forces had employed identical tactics throughout the war. He personally had worn German uniforms while operating behind enemy lines during clandestine missions in occupied France. The military tribunal drew a clear legal distinction between using enemy uniforms during actual combat and using them exclusively for infiltration and deception. Since it could not be definitively proven that Skorzeny had personally ordered his men to engage in combat while wearing American uniforms, the tribunal ultimately acquitted all defendants on all charges. The verdict generated considerable controversy given the circumstances. 17 of Skorzeny's subordinates had already been executed for engaging in precisely the same actions for which he was now acquitted. The apparent difference seemed to be primarily timing and available evidence. The men executed in December 1944 had been captured while actually wearing American uniforms behind American lines. Skorzeny, tried in 1947 after the war's conclusion, could demonstrate through documentary evidence that his operational orders specifically prohibited combat while disguised. The trial established important legal precedent regarding interpretation of the laws of war. Using enemy uniforms for infiltration and deception was ruled a legitimate ruse de guerre under international law, provided combatants removed those disguises before engaging in actual fighting. This distinction would significantly influence interpretation of international humanitarian law for subsequent decades. Skorzeny did not remain in custody long after his acquittal. In 1948, he successfully escaped from an internment camp in Darmstadt. Former SS officers disguised as American military police facilitated his escape through elaborate planning. Some historians have speculated that American intelligence agencies may have tacitly permitted or even actively assisted the escape, though no documentary evidence has ever emerged confirming this theory. Skorzeny spent time hiding on a Bavarian farm, then moved through Salzburg and Paris before eventually settling permanently in Spain. He subsequently worked as a military advisor to Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser during the 1950s and early 1960s. Skorzeny died of cancer on July 5, 1975, in Madrid at age 67. He never expressed any regret for Operation Greif or any other wartime actions throughout his remaining decades. The checkpoint interrogations gradually became embedded in American military folklore and popular culture. The improvised questions about baseball statistics and Hollywood celebrities, state capitals, and movie stars evolved into enduring symbols of how cultural identity functioned as an effective security tool during the crisis. The completely improvised system, however chaotic and often unjust in application, ultimately proved remarkably effective at exposing infiltrators whose intensive language training simply could not replicate the casual cultural knowledge that Americans absorbed naturally from childhood. Being authentically American involved far more than merely speaking English fluently or wearing the correct uniform. It required shared cultural experiences, common reference points, and collective memories that could not be adequately taught to foreigners during weeks of intensive preparation. This cultural cohesion, so often taken completely for granted during peacetime, proved to be a genuine national security asset when systematically tested by trained enemy infiltrators. The 17 men formally executed for participation in Operation Greif are remembered today primarily through military cemeteries and historical scholarship. Their graves at Lommel are maintained with identical care as those of soldiers who died in conventional combat operations. The cemetery makes absolutely no distinction between those executed as spies and those killed in standard battlefield action. All are simply German war dead. Manfred Pernus was 23 years old at his execution. Gunther Billing, only 21, remained a convinced National Socialist adherent to his final moment, shouting his loyalty as the rifles fired. Wilhelm Schmidt, 24, faced death with quiet resignation and dignity. Each was someone's son, quite possibly someone's brother or sweetheart. Each had made a series of choices throughout their young lives that ultimately led to that frozen morning in Belgium, to those wooden posts, to those blindfolds, to those aimed rifles. Operation Greif's ultimate legacy extended far beyond its complete tactical failure. The operation comprehensively demonstrated that special operations capabilities cannot compensate for fundamental conventional military failure. Skorzony's infiltrators could not possibly capture bridges intact if Piper's panzer columns never reached those bridge approaches. No amount of deception, confusion, or psychological warfare could substitute for the decisive breakthrough that never occurred. Yet simultaneously, the operation succeeded brilliantly in creating disruption and confusion far exceeding what the actual infiltrators physically accomplished. The mere possibility of infiltration created widespread panic affecting hundreds of thousands of soldiers throughout the theatre. This substantial gap between perception and reality became a fundamental lesson in modern strategic thinking about psychological warfare and information operations. The Battle of the Bulge officially concluded in late January 1945, with German forces withdrawn to their starting positions or beyond. Allied forces resumed their methodical advance toward Germany's heartland across a broad front. Within 4 months, the Third Reich collapsed completely under pressure from both east and west. The Führer committed suicide in his underground bunker beneath Berlin as Soviet forces closed in. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945, ending the European War. The 17 executed Operation Greif participants were already in their graves, their personal wars having ended violently on Belgian soil far from their German homes. Their operation had failed comprehensively in achieving its tactical objectives, yet succeeded remarkably in creating confusion and fear that genuinely hampered Allied operations during the critical opening phase of the battle. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, addressing Parliament on January 18, 1945, while heavy fighting still raged, declared the battle undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the entire war and one that would be regarded historically as an ever-famous American victory. Churchill explicitly noted that American forces had engaged 30 to 40 men for every single British soldier committed to the battle, emphasizing that this was fundamentally an American battle fought primarily by American troops and representing primarily an American victory. The checkpoint guards who improvised questions about baseball statistics and Hollywood gossip had no idea they were creating enduring folklore. They were simply solving an immediate operational problem, improvising practical security measures to identify potential enemies threatening their units. Their improvised solution worked effectively because it was rooted in genuine shared culture and lived experience. Americans knew about baseball and Hollywood and state capitals because they had grown up American, absorbing that knowledge naturally throughout childhood and adolescence. Germans attempting to impersonate Americans could diligently study factual information, but they simply could not replicate that natural cultural fluency developed over decades of lived experience. This fundamental distinction between learned facts and absorbed culture proved absolutely decisive in exposing infiltrators. The German failure comprehensively demonstrated an enduring principle that remains relevant across subsequent decades. Cultural knowledge absorbed through lived experience over many years cannot be rapidly taught to adults from fundamentally different cultural backgrounds. Modern special operations forces and intelligence services have learned directly from Operation Greif's mixed results. Contemporary intelligence agencies now invest years preparing deep cover agents precisely because genuine cultural fluency cannot be quickly imparted through classroom instruction. Language training, factual knowledge, and behavioral coaching remain necessary but fundamentally insufficient. Authentic cultural fluency requires sustained immersion and substantial time. The fundamental challenge persists unchanged across the decades since 1944. Culture is absorbed through lived experience, not taught effectively in classrooms within compressed timeframes. Operation Greif demonstrated simultaneously both the potential and the inherent limits of special operations forces. Small specialized units conducting unconventional operations can create disruption far beyond their actual numbers. The psychological impact can exceed direct tactical results by multiple orders of magnitude. But without conventional military success establishing the necessary operational conditions, special operations alone cannot achieve decisive strategic objectives. Deception and confusion cannot substitute for actual military victory on the battlefield. For military historians and contemporary strategists, Operation Greif remains a compelling case study in planning, execution, and unintended consequences. It exemplifies how ambitious planning completely disconnected from realistic assessment of available capabilities inevitably leads to operational failure. The Führer's late-war decision-making consistently followed this pattern throughout 1944 and 1945. Concepts were grandiose in their ambition, woefully inadequate in allocated resources, and utterly divorced from operational reality on the ground. Yet simultaneously, the operation's unintended success in creating widespread panic validated the fundamental concept that psychological warfare and deception can function as genuine force multipliers under specific circumstances. The 17 men who died before firing squads for wearing enemy uniforms during combat operations would be almost completely forgotten today if not for the historical record preserving their individual stories. They were not particularly important men in the grand sweep of history. They accomplished remarkably little before their capture and trial. Their operation failed comprehensively in every measurable objective. Yet their executions marked an important moment in both military and legal history, serving to clarify the practical application of international law regarding proper and improper use of enemy uniforms during warfare. Their deaths contributed to establishing legal precedents that would influence military justice for generations. The legacy lives on primarily in the lessons their operation taught successive generations of military professionals. Identity verification remains absolutely crucial for operational security in any military force. Cultural knowledge remains extraordinarily difficult for outsiders to convincingly fake within compressed timeframes. Special operations remain operationally valuable, but cannot substitute for conventional military success. The laws of war remain critically important, but remain subject to interpretation based on specific circumstances and available evidence. The human cost of warfare extends far beyond those killed in direct combat to include those executed after capture for violations of the laws of war. Each execution represented a human being with family and personal history and unrealized potential, ended by bullets fired under legal authority after proper trial and conviction. The graves at Lommel Mark, lives cut short by war and its brutal logic, young men who will never grow old. The checkpoint guards who asked questions about baseball and state capitals were themselves American soldiers following orders and subsequently carrying psychological burdens. Many veterans who served as guards or members of firing squads reported lasting emotional impacts from executing prisoners, even enemy combatants properly convicted of espionage. Operation Greif ultimately failed to capture even a single bridge intact. It caused no major strategic destruction of critical infrastructure. It killed relatively few Americans through direct action. But the fear and paranoia it deliberately created caused significant delays in reinforcements, disrupted command decisions throughout the theatre, and consumed substantial resources during absolutely critical days. The indirect impact, while impossible to quantify with mathematical precision, demonstrably shaped the battle's opening phase in ways favourable to German forces. The infiltrators being apprehended, tried, convicted and executed within mere days demonstrated American military justice functioning under extreme wartime pressure. The remarkable speed from initial capture to final execution reflected desperate combat conditions and established important precedent, though modern legal standards would certainly require substantially more deliberate proceedings with enhanced protections for defendants. The Battle of the Bulge continued grinding forward for 5 additional weeks after the infiltrators were executed, ultimately resulting in decisive German defeat and the complete elimination of Germany's capacity for strategic resistance in the Western theatre. The story of Operation Greif and the broader Battle of the Bulge serves as an enduring reminder that warfare encompasses far more than conventional battlefield operations and tactical maneuvers. Psychological impact, cultural factors, and perception often matter as much as direct tactical results in determining strategic outcomes. A failed operation that creates widespread panic may ultimately achieve more strategic disruption than a successful operation that remains completely undetected by enemy forces. The checkpoint interrogations, absurd and unjust as they frequently seemed to those subjected to them, functioned effectively because they tested cultural knowledge that genuine Americans possessed naturally, while infiltrators could not adequately replicate despite intensive preparation. The American soldiers who fought throughout the Battle of the Bulge faced not merely a powerful enemy offensive executed with operational surprise, but simultaneously the profound psychological burden of suspecting that enemies might be literally anywhere, wearing any uniform, speaking any language. This systematic erosion of certainty and trust marked a genuinely new dimension in modern warfare that would continue influencing military operations, security procedures, and intelligence practices for generations to come, extending from that frozen Belgian December into our present day.